ProPublica was created in response to the business crisis in the press and the fact that with a lot of legacy media, expensive things like investigative journalism are being pushed down and out. The resources to do them just aren't available. With ProPublica, we've created a nonprofit that does investigative journalism in the public interest, and the sole mission of which is to spur reform, to produce real change through journalistic means. The mission of ProPublica is to do investigative journalism that spurs change, that creates reform. But at the same time, we're trying to build a platform, a publishing platform that will enable us not only to do that today, but to do it with even greater impact tomorrow. We need to do that by increasing our reach through social media and by building the platform in a host of other ways through new kinds of journalism that use big data, for instance, but also by simply doing more stories so that we can produce change today and be in a position to produce even more tomorrow. ProPublica is a digital native and a nonprofit. When you put those two things together, what that means is that as a publisher, our incentive is to share things, share content, share stories that can make a difference, rather than hoarding them. So, for instance, we operate under a Creative Commons license. That means that other publishers are free to reprint our stories in full, as long as they do so with credit and just a link back. And it also means that we share our content and indeed urge other news organizations to pick up our stories and use them to generate local stories, for instance, based on national databases that can tell stories in important new ways and have across the country. One example of this is our Dollars for Docs database that reflects payments from pharmaceutical companies to doctors all across the country. We've done lots of stories about that, but beyond our own stories, we've made it possible for literally hundreds of local news organizations around the country to tell stories in their own communities about local doctors in a way that brings that kind of important story home for people all over the country. ProPublica is focused on impact, on spurring change through journalistic means. So we've won a couple of Pulitzer Prizes, the first ever for an online news organization, the first ever for material not published in print, and that's nice, but that's not really what we focus on. What we focus on are those stories of change, the stories that make a difference. Part of what makes this possible is that as a digital publisher, we're able to devote 85 cents out of every dollar we spend to news. That, for instance, is exactly the opposite of a legacy newspaper, where even the good ones spend maybe 15 cents out of every dollar on their news efforts. It's simply a way in which digital publishing is much more efficient. At ProPublica, our mission is impact through journalistic means, spurring change, spurring reform. That's what we look for. But beyond that, we also look to engage our audience, to help them better understand the world they live in and the stories that we and others are telling, the kinds of stories that are shaping our society. One way we do this is through big data and the use of new kinds of storytelling that uses data in new ways, that takes huge databases through which we can tell national stories, but also produce them in a way that local news organizations around the country can use them to tell stories at the local level. That extends the impact, is a force multiplier, in effect, that can really make a difference not only nationally, but in communities across the country. ProPublica was fortunate enough in 2007 to be launched with a major gift from the Sandler Foundation, and that allowed us to get off the ground quickly and robustly, to hire some of the best people in the country, and to win 2 Pulitzer Prizes in our first 4 years of existence. But in recent years, we've needed to, and we have, transitioned to a point where now thousands of donors each year help us produce our investigative journalism in the public interest, providing ProPublica the chance to have impact and to spur change through investigative journalism. At ProPublica, we judge our accomplishments through the kind of impact our journalism has. So, a few examples. In California, our work on abuses at the state nursing board led to reform and the replacement of the entire board. In fracking, we were the first national news organization to talk about the dangers to our nation's water supply that unregulated fracking might pose. Our stories on the Wall Street crash and the kinds of practices that preceded it have led to more than $300 million in fines. We've also been fortunate enough at ProPublica to win 2 Pulitzer Prizes, the first ever awarded an online news organization and the first awarded for material never published in print. ProPublica is a relatively new kind of animal, a nonprofit investigative news organization. When we started in 2008, that meant that people our reporters called for comment on a story, for instance, had usually not heard of us. But it also meant that we had the ability to make use of each of those kinds of dimensions to forge a new kind of news organization. But as a nonprofit, we're able to share things that other news organizations, legacy news organizations, might need to hoard. We can share our innovations. We can share our stories themselves, allowing reprints under Creative Commons. We can take advantage of social media to achieve much greater growth than might otherwise be the case, and to reach larger audiences at lower costs than would ever have been possible before. More resources would enable ProPublica to add more reporters on critical new beats. But beyond that, we probably need to do more in audio and video, which is increasingly how people want to have stories told, particularly online. We've had some success in this area. We've done a number of music videos, and our podcasts are increasingly widely listened to. But we need more audio and video capability, and we aim to build that in the future. We've worked extensively in video with Frontline as well as 60 Minutes. We've worked in audio with NPR and This American Life. But what we don't have at ProPublica to any great extent is our own audio or video capability. And we're looking to build that in the months and years ahead.